Are Russian trolls ramping up their efforts on social media ahead of another U.S. election? Carl Sabo is vice president and general counsel for NetChoice and professor of internet law at George Mason University's Scalia Law School, joining me now to discuss. Carl, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's talk about this. Russian trolls. I hate to hear anything having to do with Russia, Russia, the hoax they launched against President Trump. But the fact is, Russia does have trolls and internet bots and things that they launch against our country and their information warfare attacks against us. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so foreign adversaries, of course, are going to try to interfere in our elections, and that makes sense. They want to tilt the field in a manner that is most favorable to them. So, for example, Iran is much more favorable to a Harris Biden administration than it would be a Trump administration. Trump was basically, strangling the money out of Iran. It's been the exact opposite. So what we are seeing is Russian trolls and Iranian trolls and many other bad actors from across the world are targeting our elections. And yes, it is really scary. And what's even scarier is that our government has the laws, it has the tools, but seems to not have the will to step up and enforce those rules and restrictions. So today, there are laws making it illegal to engage in foreign influence in elections. There are laws today that make it illegal to engage in fraud and deception. There are laws today to make it illegal to abuse artificial intelligence to do impersonations and misrepresentations. But what we are not seeing are enforcements of those laws. And that's where the real problem lies.
So how can those laws be enforced? I mean, is it the Department of Justice? Who would be the actual enforcement arm for this?
Yeah, so it's not the FBI, despite what they did with the Hunter Biden laptop story and all those types of issues. It is actually our State Department, our Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice. Prosecute the bad actors. Now, we saw this happen in New Hampshire. AI was used to impersonate Joe Biden and sent out a bunch of robocalls saying that he had dropped out of the race. Now, of course, that is true today, but back then it was for the primaries. And what ended up happening was that individual was severely prosecuted under existing laws. The Department of Justice, Federal Communications Commission enforced against that bad actor. That's what we need. We need more enforcement. We need more bad actors behind bars because at the end of the day, laws that go unenforced just show that we are going to say something and then not put our money where our mouth is.
So the Department of Homeland Security, State Department, and DOJ. So these are agencies
Exactly.
that have kind of demonstrated that they're under capture by the Democrats. So they want to battle disinformation, but would they do so equally for both candidates? Because there's going to be disinformation about both of them.
Yeah, I think we just saw letters from Mark Zuckerberg, the head CEO of Facebook, talking about how Facebook was pressured by the Biden Harris administration to remove discussions of COVID, even from doctors, to remove things like the Hunter Biden laptop story or anything that the administration didn't like. And that's terrifying. That is illegal today for an administration to do that. It's a violation of the First Amendment. And unfortunately, what we are not seeing are any heads roll in the administration for violating Americans' First Amendment rights of free speech. Now, I will say there are some things that we ourselves can do to protect ourselves. One, it's that old Reagan adage, right? Trust but verify. Just because you read something online doesn't necessarily make it true. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, go check a couple other sources, watch Salem News to get accurate information on whether what you're reading is truthful or just complete myth. Simultaneously, do not expect the government to come in and engage in censorship equally. It is not in their interests, and they shouldn't be doing it to begin with. So, once again, it is incumbent upon us to know what we read, to trust, and to verify. That's the way that you defeat it. And that's the way that we avoid the misinformation that we're likely and currently seeing from nation states like Russia and Iran to influence our elections.
Yeah, and the thing that I'm noticing is there's a lot of articles around about this. Like you have CNN and NPR writing about this, but what they're doing is they're talking about the sham news sites that spoof real publications or they talk about Russian propaganda and they're calling it a busy global election year, but the targets are American voters. And they're saying elections in Europe are also being targeted, Paris Olympics, so they kind of give a broad view of it. But at the end, they're really the underlying kind of thesis of all of these articles is that somehow anything that attacks Harris or a Democrat is illegitimate. Anything that attacks, quote unquote, their favorite buzzword, democracy, that's a disinformation attempt. That's illegitimate. It's a sham. But anything that, quote unquote, holds accountable someone like President Trump or any Republicans, any big name Republicans like Senator Ted Cruz or anyone who's running for office this year under the Republican banner, that's not really disinformation. That's more like, that's fact checking, that's investigative journalism, that's news. I mean, even in their assessment that we are being attacked by foreign actors, they cordon it off into two, like attacks on Republicans, legitimate. Attacks on democracy, illegitimate.
I mean, let's remember, President Trump was shot about less than a month ago, an attempted assassination. Right after that, you heard all these comments from across the board in Democratic parties saying, oh, yeah, we really need to dial back the rhetoric. We didn't see any of that at the DNC convention last week. And simultaneously, no one's holding the Democrats to account for their failure to actually pull back on the explosive inflammatory rhetoric that they used, which ultimately helped result in the attempted assassination of President Trump. And to your point, there is no accountability. There's no accountability. And that is undermining faith in institutions. That undermines faith in democracy. And simply saying that foreign agents are engaging in influence campaigns and therefore you can't trust the outcome of the elections unless Democrats win, that is what is going to destroy institutions. Because at the end of the day, elections have two very important purposes. One, their goal is to decide who won. The second purpose, which is almost as equally important, is to convince the losing side that it was a fair and free election. And unless we have equal treatment of candidates by our media, by institutions, then that second crucial step for elections will not be met.
Yeah, my hope is that we'll see Americans kind of understand that we do have foreign adversaries, but here in this country, we have a built-in kind of an adversary. It used to be the fourth estate. It was one of the most important parts of our society. Per the founders, they said that we would need a strong and robust journalistic endeavor. We would need the press in order to hold elected officials accountable and to root out corruption and to investigate stories about regular Americans who might be involved in the power broking that goes on. Because let's face it, power brokers in the private sector obviously intersect with our elected officials to craft legislation that benefits them that could be harmful to Americans. And our journalists used to root that out, but now they just attack Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you have to acknowledge, whether you're left, right, or center, under the President Trump administration, we had a news industry that was holding government accountable. Everything President Trump said was checked, fact checked, and triple checked. He was pressed on issues, he was pressed on positions, and he had to justify them. He was available for media all the time. In fact, that's a lot of the complaints from much of his staff. That needs to be done for everyone, because the more politicians engage with their constituents, with voters, the more confidence it gives voters in our elected officials. And simultaneously, it forces those politicians to be accountable and recognize that at the end of the day, they work for us, not the other way around.
They do. They work for us. And the journalism experts, as they're called, the media, they're also accountable to the American people. And I think I'd like to see the same robust response they had during the Trump administration. They should have been doing that this entire 3 years with Biden. It's always such a pleasure to have you here, Carl Szabo. Great to talk to you, VP and General Counsel for NetChoice. Talk to you again soon, sir.
Thanks, Stacey. Have a good day.
You too. Coming up, Mark Zuckerberg is admitting to censoring